So you talked before about a kind of I don't know what to say, like a traditional understanding that exists in the world about the Feldenkrais method. And of course, this is the creation of a guy who had the most bizarre and fascinating life story. And then he weaved together all these things, and then he worked at it for decades. So what he left behind is this vast universe. In almost any way you describe the method, you tend to leave out some of what he created. But if I think back again to the experience I mentioned before when we first met and I first experienced your work, something that I think was always there in Feldenkrais's approach, but I wasn't so aware of, and something we've talked about more recently in terms of whole body focusing, in terms of meditation, is the question of space. And if I am thinking, very much in terms of improving movement, and I am, even on that plane, it's like if I think that my skin is where it ends and I'm not taking the room into account, or if I'm not taking, this wall is closer to me than that wall, which is further away, which feels different than if the other wall was closer.
Yes.
And so I don't know what exactly, I just want to ask you a little bit about how might space play into what you're planning to do in the March workshop.
Yes, so thank you for bringing that up, because when we talk about our felt sense internally and our kinesthetic sense and going to sensory motor awareness, which is primary, that's only part of the story, really, because where we put our attention brings new experiences. So learning how we redirect our attention is a very big part of all of this as well, right? Sometimes we don't know where we're directing our attention, right? We're directing our attention where our habits take us to direct our attention. And a lot of that is around patterns we've learned and developed in order to cope with whatever's come up in our lives. We could call those defense patterns, we could call them coping patterns.
And it's like the spotlight of our attention sees that one thing and it does not see all of the other.
Right. And if it does start to see something else, it's very colored by that way, that habitual way we use our attention. So it's easy in Feldenkrais work to direct our attention inward. And that's a great gift of it, that we can begin to sense what we don't usually sense. And so much flows from doing that. Again, in this safe way where the lessons actually help you spread your attention from one part to the other and relationships between parts in a way that the whole begins to come alive in a new way, free of the pattern that we came in with. And that has to do with how we're moving, but also how we're moving our attention. So how much attention do we give to the space? Now, in Feldenkrais work, we definitely give a lot of attention to the ground and to gravity. And that is part of our environment. So we must do that in order, we can't just have an internal life, it's in relationship to our environment. What we don't emphasize so often in Feldenkrais is that space around us, right? Attention to that space. There are lessons about that, but we tend to gravitate a lot towards how we're moving from an internal sense in relationship to gravity. When we open our vision, then we begin to perceive space. And that is one way through the Feldenkrais lessons that we open more and more into our experience of space, whether we're focusing it more directly and centrally, whether we open it wider into more peripheral experience, learning how to navigate that difference in what is neurophysiologically our way of seeing. Is there's great learning in opening our experience to what else is possible through our vision. And there are many wonderful Feldenkrais lessons about that. There's also the felt sense of space, which for me has a different quality, because I can do that with my eyes closed and still sense what's around me. I can sense, as you were saying, the difference between when I turn my chair in this angle and how I'm oriented now diagonally towards various walls in this room. And some of them are closer, some of them are farther. And as I begin to listen and cultivate my attention towards all of that, there's a whole world of experience there that I don't usually notice. If I'm a martial artist, I do, because martial artists are trained, as Moshe was, to function in space, because you never know where your opponent is coming from.
Including behind you.
It could be definitely behind me. So what is that space behind me? Or beside me, or up there, or down there? So there's this sense of learning to attune to our experience of ourselves in relationship to that environment through our vision, through our felt sense. And then we can also talk about space as having multiple dimensions. So there's this physically felt and perceived space of the walls, of what's behind, of what's above. But how far does that extend? Does that extend beyond the walls? Does that extend to the horizon? Does that extend beyond the horizon? So there are multiple dimensions of how we experience space and can experience space. So this is where it can go from the concrete to where is my body in space, and how do I learn to turn towards this place that I didn't notice, or navigate up and down in ways that I have more support spatially than I realized. Mm-hmm. All the way to infinite space, which is the world of meditation. And I would say one more thing about space then is it is attuning to our sense of internal space. And we will definitely be experiencing that continuum from internal space, which we often approach first through breathing lessons, to the continuum in awareness from inside to outside and how far, and that all of that is us.
Looking forward to that. Well, so maybe before we conclude, I could try to segue into a slightly different question, but I don't doubt it's connected to everything else, which is that in telling people about the workshop, you've also emphasized human relationships and how this work affects how we are with each other. And it occurs to me, well, that's part of what's in the space around me are these other people. So, but maybe you could speak a little bit about, are you planning to include some partner processes in your workshop?
Most definitely. So I would like to talk about this maybe from a whole body focusing kind of language. You know, there's so many languages we can describe these phenomena through. So from a whole body focusing perspective, when I attune to grounded presence, my first experience is my internal experience, which includes the space around me, but it's about me. And that can be amplified by somebody listening to me, not giving me advice or guiding me or directing me in any way, but simply someone else's presence allows me to deepen my own presence with myself. And that's because that's how we're created. If we look at the work of Stephen Porges, for instance, he talks about how that sense of social connection is inherent in our being. It gets interfered with by often our early experiences where we may deflect in some ways from certain kinds of connections with people where we haven't felt safe, and we develop habits and patterns around what is safe, what isn't safe. And as that begins to be safer to explore, this natural capacity for social connection is our birthright, is what's inherent in the way our nervous system functions. So when one person listens to another, just like you're listening to me right now, I can speak in a different way than if I were simply presenting these ideas. It's a completely different experience. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that's really the only way I can teach, is in relationship in that way. And that's the gift I feel that has come to me through all these years of exploration, is really embracing the sense that that connection, whether we do something with it or not, but when somebody's just fully present, I shouldn't say just, when somebody is fully present with another, magic happens, right? There's a kind of safety, there's this kind of inner capacity to be alive and embracing of what we don't always do when we're in more protective modes. So one thing we will be doing is one person listening to another, both after we've had experiences with attuning to this grounded presence. Mm-hmm. In Feldenkrais work and for Feldenkrais practitioners, learning to deepen, we do that naturally in functional integration, right? Practitioner giving a lesson to someone on the table through touch is listening. We're not laying a lesson on somebody, we're listening to somebody, and information arises from that exchange. So my experience with whole body focusing is that enhances and deepens that listening in dimensions that we may not always have as Feldenkrais practitioners. That there's an enormous capacity for what can arise safely from that kind of deep inner listening. So whether it's listening to somebody talk like you're listening to me right now, or people are listening as they listen to this little clip of video, or whether I'm listening through touch, or whether I'm on the table receiving touch, listening to that touch, there's an exchange there, there's a connection there that has its own life, which is more than just me or just you. So as I deepen my own sense of presence, as you deepen your own sense of presence, there's something that happens when we come together. And that we has so many more possibilities than anything that either you alone or I alone can imagine.
What would you say to, I don't know, two members of the same family who wanted to come to the workshop, or a couple of old friends, you know, in this same, so not in terms of working within any particular practice, but just two human beings who want to connect. What will
Yes.
they find out here?
Yes, I think that's what's interesting about this workshop, is that it can create the conditions where that becomes possible, where friends or family members can learn to listen to themselves and listen to each other through movement, through speaking from the felt sense as well, which is what happens in whole body focusing. There's not pressure to speak, but speaking often emerges because meaning, personal meaning, there's room for the expression of that in whole body focusing, which I'd say is a little different than in the Feldenkrais work. That's why I think they're so complementary in their intersection. What I think is really potent about this work is that it's applicable to that kind of situation that you just asked about, as well as to practitioners and teachers. That this experience of this kind of deep listening to self and other by being present in this way is applicable to everything. That's the truth.
Mm. Just one last question comes to me as I listen to you. So I'm just kind of curious how the answer to that question would have been different for you when you began your journey all those decades ago.
Oh my
The
goodness.
world has changed so much.
The world has changed so much. And, you know, as I studied each form that I studied, that was it, right? That was it. When I did Laban, it was like my world opened up in a way that I had never imagined. So I saw the whole world that way. When I started meditation, that opened something else. I thought, I'll never be the same. And it was true, because each of these experiences I changed and learned from. And then Feldenkrais, it was like, do not pass go, do not collect $200, go, drop everything that you need to study this. And that was 40 years ago, and I'm still doing that work. And when I did whole body focusing, when I started learning that, I thought, where have I been? This feels true. They all have that kind of truth. And I think for each of us, there's a journey of listening to what is it that we need, each of us, in this moment, in this right moment. Moshe said, what's the right lesson for this person in this moment?
Right. And that's part of what I was interested in too. The people who were coming to you to explore your teaching in a different era. There's a lot of cliched ways of talking about it, but there's a lot going on these days.
There is a lot
pretty quick. And you talked about meaning. One of the things that can happen is with all the information, the meaning begins to kind of seep out of it. And a lot of people feel an absence of meaning at this point.
Yes, that we can go look more towards form and technique and strategy and languaging that. Our whole culture is full of that kind of approach at this point. I would say this work is diving under all of that to what feels true. How do I listen to myself in a way that I can proceed with my own questions, my own curiosity, my own investigations, in a way that continuously harks back to that question of what feels true to me in this moment. That's the anchor. That's the anchor. And in my work, it's really anchored in listening to the felt sense as primary.
Well, I think that's a lot to look forward to. Anything else that you want to add before we just to let people know?
I would just say
let me just say quickly, it's March 6th, 7, and 8 in Bethesda, Maryland. The workshop on the 7th and the 8th is going to be at the Carter Rock
Clubhouse.
Tennis Club. There's a smaller venue nearby for the opening gathering on the Friday evening, which will set the tone for the workshop.
Yes, and I would say on Friday evening, we will begin with an attunement to the whole body, focusing to the grounded presence practice that will then ground the whole weekend as we explore these intersections.
Great. And we're in January, but February 1 is our early bird day for this workshop. So if anyone's watching this, just a reminder there. What else, Donna?
I would just say that how this workshop evolves will come from all of these principles that I've been talking about, and it will be shaped by who is there. So I'll be attuning to the relevance to the people who are there and their own curiosities, their own concerns. And there'll be room for that.
Terrific. Well, thanks for taking the time with me to just explain. And I know I'm more excited about this now, and I hope many people watching this will feel the same and will come and experience this wonderful offering that you've put together.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the dialogue, because it's in the connection that it comes alive.
Great. Thanks, Donna.
Bye-bye, Seth.
Bye-bye.